From the outside, Michael Turner was everything a husband was supposed to be. He wore his responsibilities like a uniform, pressed shirts, measured words, and the practiced smile of a man who had built a life worth admiring. Their home, a neat two-story in a quiet neighborhood, was the kind of place people pointed to as evidence that the American dream still existed. Inside its walls, laughter sometimes echoed. Dinners were shared, and to anyone watching, Michael and Sarah appeared to be the picture of stability. But appearances had a way of lying. Sarah Turner felt that deception in the quiet moments, the in-between hours when Michael wasn't looking at her but through her. His absence wasn't just in the late nights he claimed were spent working. It was in the way he lingered in silence when she asked simple questions, the way his eyes flickered when she pressed him for details. To neighbors, he was devoted. To her, he was a man she loved but could no longer fully understand. At family gatherings, Sarah perfected her own mask. She laughed at the right moments, poured drinks, played the doting wife who believed every word her husband spoke. But beneath the practiced charm lay unease. She could feel the weight of distance between them, a distance that had crept in slowly, like water finding cracks in stone, widening them over time. Michael noticed her distraction but never addressed it. He was skilled at redirecting, at filling silences with reassurances that sounded convincing enough to anyone who wasn't listening too closely. "I'm doing all this for us," he'd murmur as he kissed her forehead before disappearing again into the night. For years, Sarah let herself believe him, even as her gut twisted with doubt. Theirs was a marriage bound not just by vows, but by habit, by the comfort of familiarity. Yet Sarah couldn't ignore how much it felt like she was married to two men, the Michael who smiled warmly across the dinner table, and the Michael whose footsteps echoed in the hall after midnight, heavy and deliberate, as if he were carrying burdens she wasn't allowed to see. Description lingered in the details, the untouched meals left cooling on the counter, the shadows stretching long in their living room while Sarah sat alone, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock. She told herself this was just marriage, that every couple carried secrets. Still, her hands sometimes trembled as she washed the dishes, a physical betrayal of the fear she would not admit aloud. When friends praised Michael, Sarah smiled with them, but a private ache sat in her chest. She remembered when love had been uncomplicated, when Michael's eyes lit up simply at the sight of her. That spark had dimmed. In its place lived something she could not name: distance, secrets, or perhaps something far darker. Michael, meanwhile, carried on with the careful rhythm of a man who understood appearances were everything. He never raised his voice in public, never faltered when others looked his way. To them, he was reliable. To Sarah, he was becoming a stranger in her own home. At night, as Sarah lay in bed waiting for him to return, she often wondered if she was imagining the cracks. Maybe this was simply what marriage became after years together. Routine, fatigue, the settling of dust over once bright love. She tried to convince herself of that, but unease gnawed at her in ways she couldn't shake. By the time Michael slipped into bed beside her, his scent carrying the sharp tang of the outside air, Sarah would keep her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. He never reached for her, and she never asked why. The facade remained intact for now. But shadows were lengthening in their marriage, stretching into corners where truth waited to be uncovered. And Sarah knew with growing certainty that something was coming, something that would shatter the silence. The silence that once felt ordinary began to change its shape. Sarah found herself listening more closely to the details. The scrape of Michael's chair as he rose quickly from the table. The way his voice dropped when he answered calls late at night. The rustle of papers he slid hastily into his briefcase. None of it screamed betrayal, yet all of it whispered of something hidden. It began with a receipt tucked in the pocket of his trousers. She found it one morning while doing laundry, a slip from a gas station 2 towns away. The timestamp read nearly midnight on a night he'd told her he was working late at the office. Her chest tightened as she stared at the numbers. When she asked him casually about it later, he smiled. A smile too smooth, too quick. "Client dinner ran long," he said, pressing a kiss to her cheek. The words felt practiced, rehearsed. Michael had always been careful, but lately his carefulness felt like a mask that was slipping. He was sharper with her, Small bursts of irritation when she pressed for details. Sighs heavy with condescension when she reminded him about little things around the house. At dinner, she studied his face as he chewed. The tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes never lingered on hers for too long. "Michael," she tried one evening, her fork pushing through untouched vegetables. "Are you sure everything's all right?" He looked up, a faint pause before he answered. "Of course. Why would you ask that?" His smile flickered, a shade too thin, and he returned to his meal as if the conversation were over. But the unease lingered, heavy in the air between them. At night, Sarah's dreams began to unravel her fears. She would wake in the dark, heart pounding. The image of Michael standing over her with a shadowed face burned into her mind. Sometimes she dreamed of doors locked from the outside, of running barefoot through their quiet street while someone, or something, chased close behind. She told herself they were only dreams, products of an anxious mind, yet they fed the paranoia growing inside her. Her days became colored by small discoveries. Another receipt, this one from a hotel bar she had never heard him mention. A phone call she overheard, his voice low, his words clipped. "No, not here. I'll take care of it." When she asked who it had been, he brushed her off with a laugh, calling it just business. But the warmth that used to follow his reassurances was gone. She began to question herself. Was she inventing a narrative that didn't exist? Was she so desperate to find fault that she was turning fragments into evidence? The thought made her stomach twist with guilt, but the doubt remained. One evening she decided to press harder. The candles on the dinner table flickered as she set down her glass. "Michael, you've been different, distant. If something's wrong, I want to know." He froze, fork halfway to his lips. Then with deliberate calm, he set it down and leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, you're imagining things. You always do this. You get restless. You start seeing ghosts where there are none." His voice was even, but his eyes were sharp, as though daring her to continue. She swallowed her reply. The words had stung, not because they were cruel, but because they carried a subtle edge of truth. Had she really become paranoid? Still, her instincts screamed louder than his dismissals. That night she lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, too steady, too controlled, like a man performing even in sleep. The darkness pressed heavy around her, and she realized the most terrifying thing wasn't that Michael might be lying. It was that she no longer knew who her husband truly was. The cracks in their life were spreading, thin lines spidering through glass that once seemed unbreakable. Sarah could feel it. Sooner or later, something would give, and when it did, the shattering would be irreversible. The first time Sarah saw Detective Ryan Cole, he appeared at their doorstep on a quiet afternoon, his badge flashing briefly before he tucked it away. He carried himself with a calm authority, a presence that instantly shifted the air in the room. "Mrs. Turner," he said, voice steady, "I'm following up on a cold case from a few years back. I was hoping to ask your husband a few questions." Sarah blinked, unsettled. Michael was still at work. She invited the detective in, hands fidgeting against the fabric of her dress as she led him to the sitting room. The questions he asked felt ordinary at first. Routine checks, whereabouts, contacts. But when he mentioned specific dates, nights Michael had been absent with vague explanations, Sarah's stomach tightened. She offered polite answers, but her mind replayed the receipts, the hushed phone calls, the lies disguised as reassurances. Later that evening, when Michael returned, Sarah told him about the detective's visit. He chuckled, sliding his tie loose, pouring himself a drink as though the matter were trivial. "A cold case? That's nothing to do with me. Police are just fishing." His smile was practiced, smooth as glass. "Don't let it get in your head, Sarah. You worry too much." But something in his tone, a hint of annoyance beneath the charm, left her uneasy. Days later, Detective Cole returned, this time catching Michael at home. Sarah stood in the hallway, listening as their conversation unfolded. "Mr. Turner," the detective began, "do you recall where you were on the night of October 12th, 3 years ago?" Michael leaned casually against the doorframe, his laugh rehearsed. "3 years ago? I barely remember last week. Surely you don't expect me to recall details like that." Cole's gaze didn't waver. "Some people tend not to forget nights tied to tragedy." The silence that followed was sharp, like glass about to crack. Michael eventually spoke, dismissing the inquiry with a shake of his head and a line about wild goose chases. Yet Sarah noticed the faint tension in his jaw, the way his hand tightened on the edge of the door. That night she tried again. "Michael, why would a detective come asking about you?" "About those dates?" He met her eyes with calm precision. "Because they're desperate. That's how cops work. They stir suspicion and watch it spread. Don't play into it, Sarah. Don't let strangers turn you against your husband." The words were steady, but the undercurrent was a warning. Sarah nodded, but inside, questions grew louder. Detective Cole's measured eyes contrasted with Michael's careful charm, and she began to wonder which mask revealed the truth. She replayed the detective's tone, the implication that tragedy and Michael's absence were not coincidences. In the days that followed, Sarah grew more cautious, more observant. She began watching Michael not as a wife, but as a quiet investigator, cataloging his moods, his patterns, his unexplained absences. When he laughed too easily, she heard the hollowness. When he grew defensive, she noted how quickly his warmth dissolved into cold silence. Detective Cole's presence lingered like a shadow. His questions had unlocked something she could no longer ignore. The cracks in Michael's persona weren't just visible to her now. They were visible to others. Late at night, lying beside him, Sarah felt the gulf widening. She turned her face to the ceiling, the detective's voice echoing in her mind. Some people tend not to forget nights tied to tragedy. She realized she no longer trusted the man she had once believed she knew better than anyone else. And in that realization, her fear deepened, not just of what Michael had done, but of what he might still be capable of. The night after Detective Cole's second visit, Sarah could not sleep. Michael's even breathing beside her only heightened her unease. His body was calm, but her mind swirled with questions. About October 12th, about the tension in his jaw, about the emptiness in his reassurances. She stared into the dark until dawn, her pulse thrumming with dread. When morning came, Michael left for work, briefcase in hand, smile pasted on like armor. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, Sarah moved quickly. Fear battled with guilt. This was her husband, yet her hands trembled as she began searching their home. The first hour yielded nothing but dust and ordinary clutter. Still, she pressed on, certain something waited, hidden beneath the life they had so carefully displayed. At the back of the closet, behind neatly folded winter coats, she found it. A small metal lockbox, heavy and cold. Her heart pounded as she carried it to the bed. It took several minutes and a hairpin to force the lock, her breath shallow with each twist. When the lid finally gave way, Sarah gasped. Inside were documents, driver's licenses bearing Michael's photograph but with different names. Birth certificates, bank cards, each one meticulously forged. Beneath the papers lay old photographs, young women smiling. Some posed with friends, others candid, captured in moments of life they never knew were stolen. And then came the objects. A silver bracelet with a delicate charm, a worn scarf, a ring, engraved on the inside with the initials CD. Sarah recognized the names. They matched women she had read about in old newspaper clippings. Women who had gone missing. The world tilted. Her hands shook so violently the photograph slipped to the floor, scattering across the carpet. She pressed her palm against her mouth to stifle a scream. This was no longer paranoia. This was proof. Her chest heaved as she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the evidence of a life she had never imagined. Michael Turner, her husband, was not the man she thought he was. He was someone else, someone who carried fragments of other people's lives like trophies. When Michael returned home that evening, Sarah was waiting in the kitchen, the lockbox open on the table. The photographs and jewelry were spread before her like an accusation. He froze in the doorway, his eyes narrowing, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second before he forced a smile. "You've been snooping." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "Who are you, Michael? Who were these women?" He sighed, stepping closer, his tone calm, rehearsed. "It's not what you think. Those documents, they were to protect us. You don't understand the kind of people I've had to deal with. I kept those things because I didn't want them used against me. And the photographs? The jewelry? How do you explain those?" Her voice cracked. His jaw tightened, but he leaned in, lowering his voice to a near whisper. I was caught up in something I couldn't control. People used me, Sarah. I did what I had to do to survive. You think I wanted this life? I'm a victim too. She shook her head, tears brimming. A victim doesn't keep trophies. For a moment, the facade wavered, a flash of irritation flickering in his eyes. Then just as quickly, he softened again, reaching for her hand. I never wanted you to find this. Everything I've done, every lie, was to protect you. To protect us, Sarah recoiled, pulling her hand back. Her chest ached with betrayal. The man before her was both familiar and utterly foreign. Michael's voice dropped to a chilling calm. If you love me, you'll believe me. You'll stand by me. Because once you walk away from this table, Sarah, there's no going back. The silence stretched, suffocating. The photographs on the table seemed to stare at her. Frozen smiles etched with secrets. She wanted to scream, to run, to tell someone, anyone. But Michael's gaze pinned her in place, daring her to defy him. That night, lying beside him, she felt the bed as a prison. Each breath he drew was a reminder. She was living with a stranger, a man she no longer knew. And the shadows of his past had now seeped into hers. And deep inside, she understood. Detective Cole's suspicions were only the beginning. The lockbox had not disappeared from Sarah's mind. Its contents haunted her even when her eyes were closed. But Michael treated the discovery as though it were nothing more than a misunderstanding, a blemish in their otherwise perfect marriage. The morning after their confrontation, he brewed her coffee, his movements casual, his smile steady. You didn't see the full picture, he told her gently, sliding the steaming cup toward her. You jumped to conclusions. People keep secrets, Sarah. Even you have secrets, don't you? She flinched. The words were not shouted but sharpened like a knife pressed against her ribs. At first, he played the role of the tender husband. He wrapped his arms around her when she shook, whispered that he loved her more than anything. You and me were stronger than the past. You'll see, he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. But tenderness was only half the game. By nightfall, his tone changed. He sat across from her in the dim kitchen light, his expression hardening. Would you ruin our marriage over the past? His eyes glinted cold. Do you really want to be the woman who betrays her husband because of things she doesn't understand? Sarah's throat constricted. Her voice faltered. Michael, I need the truth. You had the truth, he snapped, slamming his hand against the table so sharply she jumped. Then softer, almost a whisper. But you twisted it into something it isn't. That's not love. That's mistrust, the cycle repeated day after day. One moment, Michael brushed her hair back tenderly, murmuring that she was the only one who ever truly knew him. The next, he accused her of trying to destroy their life. You want to throw away everything we've built? Our home, our marriage, our future, all because you can't stop doubting me. Narration carried the weight of her torment. Sarah lay awake in their bed, the clock ticking loud in the silence. She replayed his words until they echoed in her skull. Misunderstood ruin, our marriage, not love. The line between truth and lie blurred until she no longer trusted her own thoughts. Shadows in their bedroom felt oppressive, pressing against her chest. She longed to scream, but fear chained her tongue. By day, Michael kept up appearances. To neighbors and friends, he was still the charming husband who smiled as he carried groceries, waved politely, and spoke with warmth in his voice. Only Sarah saw the cracks, the brief flickers of cruelty, the threats hidden in tenderness. He began inserting doubt directly into her sense of self. You've always been fragile, Sarah, sensitive. You imagine things that aren't there. That's why you're twisting this into something ugly. His voice was calm, paternal, as though he were soothing a child. She clenched her fists beneath the table, fighting tears. Was he right? Had she overreacted? Her mind spun in circles, unable to escape the trap he laid before her. One night when she whispered, I don't know what to believe anymore, he smiled with quiet triumph. Then believe me. Believe your husband. Isn't that what vows are for? Her stomach turned at the word vows. The promise of love and safety had twisted into shackles. Yet despite everything, a part of her still remembered the man she had once loved. The laughter they'd shared, the warmth of his touch when it was genuine, That memory became both her comfort and her curse, binding her to him even as fear hollowed her out. The power shifted slowly but decisively. Michael's voice dictated reality. His mood set the rhythm of her days. Sarah was unraveling piece by piece. Caught in the web he wove tighter with every word, every glance, every smile that concealed a threat. And beneath it all, she knew one truth with terrible certainty. The facade could not last. The cracks were widening, and the breaking point was coming. Detective Ryan Cole returned one gray afternoon, his presence carrying the weight of answers Sarah was no longer sure she wanted. He stood at the doorway, hat in hand, his expression calm but eyes sharp. "Mrs. Turner," he said, lowering his voice, "I need to ask you a few more questions. It's about your husband." Her heart pounded. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Michael to appear, but he wasn't home yet. She stepped aside, allowing the detective in. This time his questions cut closer, sharper. "On the nights of October 14th and November 3rd, where was your husband?" Witnesses placed someone matching his description near the crime scenes. He laid a small stack of photos on the table. Streets Sarah recognized. Dates she remembered Michael claiming to work late. Narration captured her tightening chest, the way her throat felt too small for air. Each photo was a pin, pricking holes in the fabric of the life she had clung to. Detective Cole studied her reaction. "Sarah, if you know something, now's the time." "Silence won't protect you." "Never does." Her lips parted, words pressing against them. She wanted to tell him about the lockbox, the documents, the gaslighting that turned her nights into a spiral of doubt. But fear clamped down. If she spoke, Michael would know. And if Michael knew, what then? When she didn't answer, Cole's voice softened. "I've seen this before. Spouses protecting monsters because they're too afraid to admit the truth. But fear doesn't erase evidence. It only delays justice." She forced a brittle smile, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. He's my husband." The detective's gaze lingered, heavy with unspoken pity. He gathered his papers and left with a promise. "We'll speak again." Sooner than later. The moment the door clicked shut, Sarah collapsed into a chair, trembling. Narration slowed on her thoughts. Guilt gnawed at her. She knew the truth now, as surely as she knew her own name. But what terrified her most wasn't Michael's past. It was his present. The way he read her silences. The way he always knew when her loyalty faltered. That evening, Michael came home earlier than expected. His eyes swept over her like searchlights. "Detective Cole stopped by, didn't he?" Her stomach dropped. He had more questions. Michael's smile was small, deliberate. "And what did you say?" "Nothing," she whispered. He stepped closer, fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture that felt more like a warning than affection. "Good, because talking will only destroy us both." His tone hardened, venom dripping beneath the calm. "You betray me, Sarah, and you won't just lose your husband. You'll lose everything. Do you understand?" Her voice shook. "Michael, you can't keep living like this." His hand slammed against the wall beside her head, making her flinch. "We live however I say we live." Then softer, almost tender. "Don't make me regret trusting you." Narration painted the house as suffocating, each room filled with invisible barbed wire. Sarah tiptoed through silence, afraid even of her own breath. Every glance, every pause in conversation carried menace. She couldn't sleep without jerking awake at shadows shifting in the dark. Michael's threats were no longer veiled. They dripped into their arguments, staining the air. "If I go down, Sarah, you go down with me," he hissed one night. "You think the police will believe you were innocent? No, they'll see you as an accomplice. You'll rot right beside me." The words carved deep, leaving her hollow. She began to wonder if he was right, if there was no escape. Her silence, her fear, her hesitation, they had already bound her to him. But within her trembling chest, something stirred, a seed of defiance. She knew she couldn't live this way forever, and though she didn't yet realize it, the breaking point, the night when words would no longer suffice, was already racing toward them. The house seemed quieter than ever that evening, though Sarah knew it was not peace that filled the silence. It was dread. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that time was running out, that she had to choose between suffocating in secrecy or stepping into the storm of truth. Detective Cole's card sat hidden in the drawer of her bedside table, its sharp edges whispering promises of escape, of justice. She had finally decided tomorrow she would call him. Tonight, she would pack what little courage she had left. But Michael sensed something different in her. He always did. When he entered the kitchen, his eyes swept across the counters, the floor, her hands. She had her bag ready, tucked near the door. His voice was low, deceptively calm. "Going somewhere, Sarah?" Her chest tightened. I need air. Just a walk." He stepped closer, closing the distance with slow precision. "No, that's not it. You've been restless, whispering to yourself at night. Answer me honestly, were you going to meet him?" The room seemed to shrink. "Michael, Detective Cole!" He spat the name like poison. "You were going to betray me." Her voice trembled, but her words found strength. "You've already betrayed me, Michael. With lies, with everything you've hidden. I can't live like this anymore." For a moment, his face softened as if he might plead. But then rage twisted his features. "So this is it? You choose them over me? You'd ruin us both?" Narration slowed as Sarah backed toward the counter, her hand brushing a glass left from dinner. She wanted to run, to scream, but her legs felt heavy. Michael advanced, words cutting like blades. "If you speak, they'll see you as complicit. Do you understand? You're not just my wife. You're in this with me. You'll hang for it, Sarah." Her tears blurred the world. "Then let them. I'd rather face prison than live in this cage you've built." The moment snapped. Michael's hand lashed out, striking the glass from the counter. It shattered on the floor, splinters flying. The crash echoed through the kitchen like thunder. Sarah screamed, the sound raw, unrestrained. An alarm that would never reach beyond these walls. He lunged, his hands gripping her shoulders, shaking her. "You're not leaving me. Do you hear me? You are mine," she struggled, nails scratching his arms, desperation fueling her. "Let me go." But Michael's fury had tipped beyond reason. His hands slid to her throat, squeezing. Time fractured into unbearable slowness. The kitchen lights flickered against shards of glass on the floor, tiny mirrors of chaos. Sarah clawed at his wrists, her breaths reduced to shallow gasps, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Her world blurred. The ceiling above her tilted, shadows swallowing edges. Memories flickered behind her eyes. Their wedding day, his smile, the promises he once made. Now all of it funneled into this single, suffocating moment. Michael's face hovered above hers, trembling, twisted with both rage and fear. "You leave me no choice," he muttered, voice breaking. "You were going to destroy us." Her body convulsed once, twice, then stilled. Her fingers fell from his arms, limp. Silence spread, cold and absolute. He held on too long, unable to accept what had already happened. Only when the stillness became undeniable did he release her. She crumpled onto the kitchen floor, surrounded by shards of broken glass. Michael staggered back, chest heaving. His hands shook violently as he looked at them, at what they had done. They were no longer the hands of a husband. They were the hands of a murderer. The kitchen hummed with silence, broken only by the ticking clock. Michael pressed his palms to his head, a strangled sound escaping his throat. "God, what have I done?" He sank to the floor beside her, rocking, staring at the lifeless body of the woman who once loved him, the only person who had ever truly known him. Now she was gone, and he was alone with the blood on his conscience. And though he did not yet know it, the walls of his carefully built life were already closing in. Detective Cole's footsteps were not far behind. The morning after Sarah's death, the Turner house looked deceptively ordinary from the outside. Neatly trimmed hedges, curtains half drawn, the kind of home where passers-by believed love resided. But inside, the air was thick with decay, a silence Michael had tried and failed to wash away. He had spent the night pacing, scrubbing at the floor and burying evidence, though every stain seemed to scream back at him. By sunrise, his story was ready. He would say Sarah had left him, that she'd been restless, unhappy, talking about needing space. People would believe it. Hadn't marriages unraveled for less? He rehearsed the lines in the bathroom mirror, forcing his voice into steadiness. But the eyes staring back at him were hollow, rimmed with exhaustion and panic. At first, his neighbors did not question much. Sarah was not seen in the garden that morning. But Michael explained casually that she had gone to visit her sister. Yet whispers began before the day was done. The shouting from the night before had been too loud, too violent to dismiss. One neighbor remembered glass breaking. Another swore they heard Sarah cry out. Rumors traveled quickly. And soon Detective Ryan Cole was at Michael's door once more. Cole's presence was unshakable, calm, methodical. His gaze lingered too long on the kitchen floor, on the faint scratches near the hallway, on Michael's trembling hands. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, already stepping over the threshold. Michael offered the story he had prepared. She left, packed a bag, said she needed time away. "I don't know where she went." Cole's brows lifted slightly. "Funny," he said. "Neighbors heard something else. They mentioned screaming, breaking glass." Michael swallowed hard, feigning offense. "Couples argue. That's not a crime," but Cole's tone sharpened. "It is when the wife doesn't come back, and when traces of blood show up under fresh bleach." Forensics dismantled Michael's fabrication with clinical precision. Drops of Sarah's blood were found behind the refrigerator, soaked into the grain of the wooden counter, clinging to the fibers of the rug despite Michael's desperate scrubbing. The locked box Sarah had discovered, the one filled with photographs, false documents, fragments of other lives, was no longer hidden. She had left it out before the fight, and detectives uncovered it easily. What Michael had painted as circumstance now glared back as evidence. The trial arrived like a storm, swift and merciless. Sarah's family filled the front rows, their faces etched with grief. Her sister wept openly, clutching a crumpled tissue as she spoke of Sarah's loyalty, her stubborn belief that marriage was worth saving. She wanted to believe in him, the sister whispered through tears, and it cost her everything. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. The neighbors' testimonies, the forensics, the inconsistencies in Michael's story, all pieced together into a narrative that left no room for doubt. Michael had not lost his wife. He had killed her. Michael's defense tried to fracture the image, suggesting Sarah had been unstable, that she had threatened to leave and provoke him. But the jury saw through the smoke. Each attempt to shift blame only painted him darker, a man grasping at lies to escape the noose of truth. Detective Cole testified with quiet conviction. He spoke not of vengeance, but of patience, the long path of evidence that led to Michael Turner's doorstep. His words carried weight not just of law, but of inevitability. When the verdict was finally read, guilty of murder in the first degree, the courtroom was silent. Michael did not flinch. His face had hardened into something unrecognizable, the mask of a man who had once been charming, even admired. Now he was a husk, stripped of pretense, exposed for what he truly was. Sarah's mother sobbed into her hands, whispering her daughter's name over and over, as if saying it enough could bring her back. The judge's gavel struck, final and unyielding, echoing like a coffin lid closing. As guards escorted Michael away, he cast one last glance at the gallery. His eyes found no comfort there, only the hollow space left by the woman who had loved him and whom he had destroyed. The weight of it pressed down heavier than chains. In his cell that night, Michael sat staring at the wall, unmoving. The silence he had once created to control Sarah now swallowed him whole. He thought of the kitchen, of her last breath, of the moment his hands chose violence over love. The memory looped endlessly, leaving him with only one truth. His marriage had been rotted long before the crime, poisoned by secrets too dark to survive. The story of Michael and Sarah Turner ended not with passion nor redemption, but with tragedy. Not a tragedy written by strangers or fate, but one authored within their own walls, by love warped into fear, and trust shattered by betrayal. And as Michael's hollow stare fixed on nothing, it became clear. Justice had been served, but no one had truly won.